Happy St. Patrick's Eve. I have to say that, I'm Irish. I'm really honored. Thank you to Rachel for inviting me and including me in this special day and all the hard work she's done. And I just want to give her a shout out in the best way I know how, being a sports lover and seeing how Notre Dame did not cruelly make it to March Madness this year. Go Butler. My apologies to the Arkansas fans. I probably just ticked off half the audience, but good luck to Butler. And now here what I'm really supposed to do. I'm delighted to be able to introduce our next panel with Professor Padfield and Dr. Pagano. You have the bios in front of you about their expertise in law, mental health, addiction, human development. So I asked them for a fun fact. Because I thought, you have a bio. Let's see what I could share with you about them that isn't in the bio. And Professor Padfield was kind enough to share with me that before law, he had spent time. He was a mental health counselor and had spent time with the Army in addition to Fort Leavenworth. And I thought, well, that's great, but not fun necessarily, but important. So I asked this morning Dr. Pagano, and she let me know that she, in Seattle, Washington, still holds the record for longest bar lifts, which I did not know what they are, but if you know the parallel bars, it's the ability to hold oneself up without the feet touching the, ground, which impressed me and says she could probably kick my posterior because I could not do that, I'm quite sure, for any amount of time. Inspired by that, Professor Padfield thought I will share something else with you, and it comes to be that he is an immigrant from England that was naturalized, I believe, at the age of 22, correct? And so you probably, go to where I go with that, not that he was an immigrant and that he's been naturalized and what that experience is like, but that it was England. And so I was curious if he knows Prince Harry and could get me an invite to the wedding. So I'll hold on that. But seriously, we're so delighted to have their expertise to talk about the helper therapy principle and to continue on this day. So thank you so much.
I'm going to use this. Okay, yeah. Well, thank you very much. Please wave or holler or let me know if the... actually, maybe I will use this. I realized after we started that my fun fact should have been that when I get a microphone in my hand, I have this almost irresistible urge to start a karaoke session. Yeah, I just want to echo what everybody else has said, just how wonderful this is, everything that went into creating this symposium and getting us all here and the support of the people here and the sponsors and the law school. It's really fantastic. And yeah, so my name is Stefan Padfield. I'm a professor at the University of Akron School of Law. My wife, Dr. Maria Pagano, is really the driver of this presentation, and I am basically acting as maybe a translator for the legal community. I'm actually a corporate governance guy. So, and if you're interested in that, you can follow me on Twitter at Prof. Padfield. I will give you one little prediction. I think in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, if you're following that at all, with the baker being challenged for not producing the cake for the gay couple, I predict it's going to be in favor of the baker because the Colorado Civil Rights Commission targeted him in some unlawful way. We'll see how that turns out. But either way, I'm going to write about the corporate personhood stuff related. So, getting to what we're doing here, let me give you a little overview. And the timing, what I'm going to do with this timing is, I know that there is a Q&A at the end, but I really, I'm going to give you a quick overview of really my wife's work with this helper therapy principle, and then I'm going to leave 10 to 15 minutes now in this session for Q&A, because I assume there will be some questions, and hopefully we can make some additional time for that, and Maria will answer most, if not all, of those questions, and she can also kick me if I get something wrong during the course of this presentation. So what are we going to do? I'm going to give you the pitch right up front, so if nothing else, you'll know why we're here. Give a little bit of history for this notion, which is ultimately going to be that helping others, providing service to others, assists in recovery. You get better outcomes for people in recovery the more that they're helping other people, and that this has a long history. I'm sure this is striking a chord with many of you from perhaps religious teachings, right? It's not this, earth-shattering idea. What is earth-shattering is that my wife has documented this empirically. So we now have data that shows if you get people active in helping others, they have better recovery outcomes. And obviously, or hopefully obviously, getting people involved in service is not that expensive, right? There are ways to do that. It's actually very inexpensive and taps into a system that we already have. And if we're going to get better recovery outcomes by doing that, it almost seems like a no-brainer. So after the history, going to look at some empirical findings. I think we have about 7 studies that Maria has been involved in, and I may, depending on the timing, just reference those and move on. Talk about what we're looking for in terms of implementation. Make a call for future research and advocacy. There's a lot of room here for people to do really good work in a variety of areas to advance the cause, if you will. Address some criticisms, and then again open it up for Q&A with maybe 10 minutes or so, 10, 15 minutes to go. Okay, so the proposal basically is, and a lot of this will reference Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's perfectly applicable to the opioid crisis, right? We have Narcotics Anonymous, and even heroin addicts go to AA meetings, so that really shouldn't sort of cause a problem in terms of this analysis. But we will be referencing Alcoholics Anonymous and the related 12-step program throughout this presentation. So it's not uncommon at all for judges, for example, in sentencing to have both AA meeting attendance as part of the recommendation and community service, okay? Given what Maria has documented in her work, the idea of, instead of going to community service, have the individual go do service at the AA meeting. You're already sending them there for this 12-step program, and if they can get active in helping others, and again, we've got this evidence to show that that's actually going to improve outcomes, that seems like a pretty simple switch about the way that we're doing things that could be very useful, and in fact might make other people, like the case manager, who now has one less thing to worry about, that being the community service, in some meaningful sense, quite happy. And, I should say right off the bat, in terms of the theory underlying this, right, why does this work, how does this work, why might this be particularly relevant to the opioid crisis, at least part of the answer may be that there is a problem of social connectedness, right, that what the drugs give the user, and I think this is, from my understanding, particularly relevant in the context of heroin, is this feeling of connectedness, right? This sense of just, you hear this talk of just feeling, sort of enveloped in this warm love, right? Very rewarding. And that we live in a time where we have less and less of that in our own lives, right? I just saw this morning, literally, a Pew research study that said we are connected to our devices all the time. So we think we have a lot of social connectedness because we're liking each other's Facebook posts and we're commenting on Twitter, but the actual human interaction, person to person, seems to be less and less and less, right? Spending all our time on video games, watching reality shows, whatever it is. I mean, I know I'm sounding like I'm going on a curmudgeon's rant here in a minute, but there seems to be a connection here, right? And so getting people active in service works on a number of levels, okay? 1, you're actually dealing with another human being. 2, if you're at the AA meeting or the NA meeting or a related program, they are a fellow sufferer. And there's a discrete line of work that shows that helping someone who is suffering from a similar condition that you have, and this doesn't have to be addiction, this can be, I believe, diabetes, right? There's a number of places where this shows up, has a unique reward for you as the giver of the help, right? So you're having some social connectedness, you're benefiting from this, helping others who have a similar condition to you, and so it just works on a number of levels, both empirically and theoretically. We think we have an important story to tell. Okay, so I think that covers that slide. And also just, and this is partly, certainly part of the proposal and also part of the call for action is ideally we get some courts that buy in, right, and add service work at the assigned 12-step meeting, and then we get the data collection to go along with that, right, to show more dramatically both where there's room for improvement, how it is working, how it compares to the usual sentencing guidelines. Okay. So I do have some awful slides here, the kind that you're never supposed to make with a bunch of stuff that you can't read. Deal with it. Actually, no. Part of the story here is I'm going to read them to you in large part, and so that'll be okay. And also, if you need them later, I will happily send them to you. So what's going on here? Some history with this role of service in recovery. Basically, we've got empirical evidence. We can go back all the way to the religious texts. We have the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, which really, there is some controversy around the program and its effectiveness. Not everybody thinks it's the greatest thing ever, but there also seems to be quite a bit of evidence that it is at least as effective as some other modalities that are more generally accepted, perhaps. And that program is really fundamentally rooted in getting at the selfishness and self-centeredness of the addict and alcoholic, that is a core component of addiction, and that the program of recovery deals with getting out of self, breaking that, I believe it's referred to the bondage of self, right? And that helping others and being of service is a core component of that program. Okay, and I think I mentioned about how shared condition helping is particularly effective. Okay, we've also got another sort of lineage here in psychology, the wounded healer tradition. It also has some ties to Alcoholics Anonymous, but again, some theoretical background, some studies that suggest that helping, if someone is suffering with an ailment like addiction, helping someone else with a similar condition has very powerful therapeutic effects. And part of there's many interesting aspects to this, I believe, which is why I'm here with my wife. But one of them is that a lot of treatment focuses on giving help to the addict, giving help to the sufferer. But we don't really talk a lot, or there isn't a lot of conversation about getting that person to help others and understanding that the benefit to the helper can often outweigh the benefit to the person receiving the help. And again, the cost effectiveness of this sort of therapy, I think, is inherently obvious. There's also some explanation here, or theory, if you will, from evolutionary psychology, right? This idea that evolutionary selection can actually take place at the group level, and so this social connectedness actually could be selected for and be sort of a core part of who we are and how we function. And so the proposal makes sense from that perspective as well. Okay, I think I'm going to move through some of this a little more quickly. All right, so with the empirical findings, basically I've got slides here on 7 papers that my wife, Dr. Pagano, has published along with other co-authors that both either demonstrate empirically the benefits or document the literature and the history behind the effectiveness of this. So I'm going to move through these pretty quickly. The first one makes the point that without intervention, approximately 10% of the population of addicts that has been studied will get active in service themselves and will demonstrate some of these benefits, which means there's a tremendous amount of room to increase that number, right? It was mentioned in an earlier presentation, and I think this is so incredibly important to not lose sight of. If you just get one addict off the street, that has immediate significant dollar implications, right? In terms of the EMS going out, in terms of the ER costs. I mean, it just, not to mention the life and all the lives that surround the sufferers. So, if there's benefits to getting people active in service, and you move this default number of 10% to 25%, right, and you get the benefits, I think it's hard to argue with that as something worth pursuing. Okay, and there does not seem to be, and one of the points I'll get to in the criticisms, there may be some Establishment Clause concerns that are worth noticing, but certainly does not seem to be any requirement for any particular sort of religious outlook or even spiritual outlook for this to work, and that seems to be important. Okay, I think I can jump through some of these pretty quickly. The aside effects, okay? So we've been focusing on addiction, the loss of life, the financial cost, but there's so many things that go with that, right? There's incarceration, there's crime, there's, STDs, the ripple effects of the lives of people that are in the midst of this addiction. It's really hard to calculate. And so anything we can do, obviously, to reduce the number of people suffering with this illness, again, it has a positive ripple effect in the other direction. much of the articles that I am skipping over really, again, the main point is they document empirically, having followed large sample sizes and doing reporting studies of self-report in large part of, what did you do to help? Did you help at all? What form did that take? And then how did that impact recovery outcomes? And again, very clear evidence that those individuals that are engaged more in some type of service work have better outcomes over the periods measured. Okay, so the implementation, again, just to repeat, the core one, although this can take other forms like treatment providers, would be to have courts that are already sending addicts that they are dealing with to 12-step programs and also already requiring community service, that they just modify the program slightly to have that service be in the AA meeting or other 12-step meeting that they're going to get these added benefits of helping others, particularly others with the same condition. So where are the opportunities for future research and advocacy? So obviously the research that would go along with the implementation of this sort of program, right, following the outcomes and looking for sort of opportunities to improve those outcomes. But there's also work to be done in advocacy and certainly in the law, as I'm going to mention in more detail in a minute. There are some issues from the Establishment Clause side of things, which, separation of church and state, where courts that have addressed the issue seem to be pretty well on the side of they look at AA meetings essentially as a church, or NA meetings at a church, and sending somebody to an AA or NA meeting with the state's authority is the equivalent of forcing them to go to church, which violates the Establishment Clause. I think at the very least, there is room for work there, right? It is not my area. I've not spent a ton of time looking at these cases, but my relatively quick read is those cases are not very well thought out, to put it bluntly. For example, probably the leading case, I believe, is a Ninth Circuit case, and essentially the reasoning was, well, the defendants aren't objecting with us characterizing it as a church, and the plaintiff argues it's a church, so we're just going to say it's a church, and that's then from then on been cited as precedent for AA as church. It's not unlike in my area with corporate personhood. The famous case, that's the groundswell in constitutional law, is a case where the court reporter just happened to drop a note in the introductory part of the opinion saying, yeah, we think corporations are persons under the 14th Amendment, and that's it. Now everybody just cites Santa Clara as if there was some deep, thoughtful analysis of whether corporations should have equal personhood. And in a way, the law here strikes me as somewhat similar. So I think there's some work to be done there that could free up courts to take advantage of this opportunity with this helper therapy principle. And then the other criticism is just along the lines of expectations and beliefs about the efficacy of this proposal, right? So people that would challenge the work that's being done or the effectiveness of AA as a whole, and just understanding that providers, judges, treatment providers need to be ready with answers for those challenges, and also that there's work to be done, right? Either way, whether you believe in these approaches or not, more data is better. Okay, so I've talked about the First Establishment Clause, First Amendment. Again, you can get these slides from me. I did get the very strong sense in my quick review that this does seem to be the weight of the cases. And you might ask yourself, well, then why is this going on? If the plaintiffs in these cases win, why are there so many courts and judges that are already sending people to AA meetings? And part of it is simply, well, you have to know enough to sue, right? And so if you don't sue, then you keep going to the AA meeting. And again, I think the law is complicated, let's put it that way. So I don't know that there's a bunch of people rushing out to make this their number one priority to make sure no judge anywhere sends people to AA. That seems like it's pretty low on the priority scale, but that is an issue. Effectiveness concerns I've already mentioned. So, perfect. Somebody must be looking out for me. Right at 11 o'clock, we can go to questions. So please, anything at all, and particularly if you're curious about the empirical work, because really that is our primary goal here, is to expand the understanding of the work. And is there anything you want to add, by the way?
No, I'm just eager to get questions and get a sense of how the information is being digested, and open up the floor for questions.
I think we talked about this a little bit already, but this is more of a comment we talked about. There are other recovery groups, and now courts are starting to give people options like smart recovery groups. So I think that your solution can easily be tweaked to include these other recovery groups that aren't faith-based. And secondly, I think there's another line of research that even bolsters your claim of kind of this helping, and that is the desire of humans to have a purpose. And a lot of persons who are addicted do not maybe have steady employment. They don't have a sense of purpose, and this helping somebody else gives them a purpose, a reason to stay sober, and a reason to wake up in the morning and to live. So I think that's
one of the things that is so original about this helping a fellow sufferer is you're able to turn a dark past to greater good. Like, it is no longer something to shove under the bed and wish it went away. It is your ticket for helping and reaching someone else like no other person can. So the service element is tapping that, unique lens you bring. And I think, in a lot of the settings that addicts, alcoholics find themselves in, they're looked down on with what they bring. They're, they're in the ER. Why are you doing that? Or, in treatment settings, it's forget what you know. You need to forget everything you know, and I'm going to inform you what you should know. So this modality builds upon hey, maybe where I've been and such could be useful. I hope you take away from our talk some basics that there's a vein that's posited as the root cause of addiction, and this includes heroin, and that's self-centered thinking, self-absorption. It can come out in various forms, exhibitionism down to depression, down to, I'm just extremely focused on me, and I have not much knowledge or interest in you. So the social connectedness, though, in the brain, we know this, the opioid mu receptor, it gets blocked, and you're no longer aware of the distress from being isolated when you get high. So it's directly hitting that part that is distressing. So the whole thing here is, though, when you get sober and start to live, you've got to figure out, where's my joy? I mean, if life's not better, why not go back? Finding a way to live and live better has got to be part of the solution. And medications that we've been developing are fabulous, but they're short term. So once that physical dependency is subsided, you're left with a mental obsession that you wake up with, regardless of how long you're sober. You wake up with this. It's like obesity. To stay fit, you have to exercise. I'm sorry you have obesity. I don't think obesity is a moral issue, but here's the solution. You need to exercise, and here are forms of it that really can help you. So we, as providers and in the law, we need to get them active in a form of behavior that produces a better life. And not all forms of service, it's not picking up litter. I've studied this if you want data. It's targeted at the fellow sufferer. And there's simple forms of service you can do anywhere across the country at meetings. They don't require skill. They don't require you to have a certain length of time sober. But it's activating. It's getting you engaged. And we know we learn better when we're engaged. But you also get social connectedness, and you start to develop that sober lifestyle, recreation, friends, and you can be around people who say, it'll get better, and hold your hand for the long haul. Most treatments work while they're in place. This is a lifelong illness. So what I've done is really just put the science to show what is already working. Service. It cuts the risk of relapse in half. It cuts the risk of going to jail in half. It reduces crime, violent crime. it reduces depression. What I found curious is that I wanted to know, well, naturalistically, who are the people more likely to start to help? If you're more depressed, you're actually more willing to start to help. You're willing to, like, get the encouragement of what counselors do. It's like you need to participate in 12-step program, and service is emphasized. If you're more depressed, you're more willing to try a behavior that may seem foreign. So that whole finding is going against the notion we have to treat people like they're fragile entities and, oh, they can't do this. This is like exercise. Would we limit recommendation on that if you're obese? I don't think so. The other thing I like about service is that it keeps you coming back. If you have a commitment, you keep coming back. So much of this is you've got to have a hook of keep coming back to where the wellness is. Medications can do that if you have to keep coming back to get a script or a fill. But again, this is not long-term solution. The isms of the illness you have to keep treating every day. Next question.
So, I'm an attorney and a trauma therapist, so I'm curious.
Thank you.
I'm an attorney and a trauma therapist in recovery, but as a therapist, how do you deal with, like when I have a client come in, the response to people that have been sexually abused or betrayed or traumatized?
Trust issues.
Right. And you say, let's get you into service work, and there's a whole lot of victim rage, which is real, and the response is, well, what about everything that happened to me? What about everything that happened to me? Did you find that, like, how do you respond to that to really sell it to somebody that keeps going back to but what about what happened to me? Because, I mean, I treat that and we work on it and heal it, but it's hard to implement an idea of, like, let's get you doing service when there's that level of, what about what happened to me?
Yeah, no, I get that. And what about me? Now, I looked at trauma specifically, and trauma doesn't limit you from getting active. So it's not a condition. The benefits from service will help you if you come in the door with trauma. A lot of this, again, is how you frame service as like exercise, and that there's simple forms of service that making coffee. That's not a commitment to like get involved in a relationship. Saying hello to people at the door greeter. I get to know more people. I'm not putting myself on the line. I got to get out of me, this lens of me. And while self-care is huge, part of self-care is getting your lens, your attitude adjusted and outside yourself for a bigger view. So that's kind of how I go about it. But you're right. The whole self-care, what about so it is a real thing. But usually you're so far on the other extreme end of me, it's all about me, that I usually don't have to worry so much about the person who comes in and has been attacked all the time. Does that answer your question?
I think it's also worth noting that it's possibly just not even mutually exclusive, right? So you have a way to address the trauma and the desire of the individual to deal with that, and then you say, and oh, by the way, in addition to that, for 1 hour or 2 hours a week, here's this other thing that's going to help you as well. So it doesn't have to be framed as an either or, I think. Was there a question back there?
Doctor, have you found any correlation empirically between attendance at church and or synagogue and level of participation in that church or synagogue, and correlation with the depth of not relapsing? I'm not phrasing that very well. But
no, I get what you're saying, yes.
The inclination not to relapse by virtue of the level of participation and membership in that church or synagogue.
Well, if you've grown up in a religion that has pounded into you, you need to help others and how that's good for you and good for others. When you hear it, when you're attending meetings, you're more open to it because you've heard it before. So I have shown with data, and I want to point to my website, helpingotherslivesober.org. There are plenty of empirical articles that you can download for this, but a higher level of religious background does help you're more likely to get active in the programmatic forms of activity in the 12-step program. So if I have a background, or if I'm currently practice a religion, I'm more likely to start to get active in service. But it's not limited to those who just have a background in religious, an affiliation or a practice. Did that answer your question?
By the way, if you go to AA.com, you're going to get American Airlines. So.
Hi there. Thank you so much for your time today, both of you. I have two questions, and I think you can probably answer them both because they're two sides of the same coin. Since we're looking at AA and NA as really the place where people would be implementing their service, how do you respond to those concerns about, kind of the non-scientific origin of AA, as well as the really strong Judeo-Christian focus of AA that we don't see in diabetes treatment or cancer treatment, for example?
Right. Well, my whole contribution, I'm hoping I brought to addiction science the evidence that the simple forms of helping have the magnitude of impact that my data show. So that's where the scientific background and our government and IAAA and NIDA have funded a lot of work since the 1990s to support the benefits of from 12-step programs. Again, most treatments work while they're in place. The Judeo-Christian origins, and again, I'm in the Cleveland, Akron area. That's the birthplace of AA. What better place to study this to get oriented to what's all this about? Again, the Oxford group was a big movement, but I want to be clear that you don't have to believe anything. The program itself stresses it's all up. You have to find your own connection and define it yourself. There's not a whiff anywhere that I've been able to detect, and I've got a sensitive, radar, that you have to believe or follow a certain track. It really stresses home the whole purpose is you've got to find access to a power within you, or a higher power that can provide the power that alcohol and drugs used to do for you to live life. And that power, again, this is all, again, thankfully the co-founders developed this and worked it out. I think we can do a better job of how to harness the sentencing structure and the mandate so that, I don't feel like shaking hands, I'm feeling shy. I get an hour of service that counts, and a meeting that counts twice instead of having to do two things. So I've got a little bit of a nudge and a motivation.
I think also, the point that was made earlier about alternative venues, right? I think there's multiple places where more work can be done. So I would be interested in seeing some people push back more on these court cases that say that this does violate the Establishment Clause. I think there's reasons to think that's a wrong answer. But even if you agree with that and think that's the way that approach should be viewed, then there's opportunities to look for other types of settings, peer-to-peer type of mutual help organizations, and then also thinking about how do you give the courts the best ability to not run into problems? How do they present this as an option, right, rather than some kind of coercion? And there's probably some pretty effective ways to do that as well that we can get better at. So we've come to the end of the time. We'll have more opportunity for questions, and I'm sure, obviously, just come up to either one of us if you see us, outside and around. So thank you very much.